Welcome to another episode of the Futurebuild Podcast, where we explore the inspiring journeys and impactful insights of the leaders in the built environment industry. I'm your host, Martin Hurn, and today we have an exciting guest who embodies the spirit of innovation and sustainability that Futurebuild champions. Joining us today is Deepthi Ravi, a dynamic architect at PLP and a sustainability specialist who has been making significant strides in the field. Deepti's work spans across leading architectural firms and influential organisations like ACAN, ULI and Architects Declare. Her commitment to circular economy thinking, promoting young leaders and emphasising well-being and biodiversity in the design makes her a true visionary in the industry. In this episode, we'll delve into Deepti's career journey, her thoughts on sustainability and the innovative projects that excite her. We'll also discuss the importance of collaboration and the role of young leaders in driving change. Welcome, Deepthi. Deepthi, great to have you here on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Great.
Thank you.
I wanted to start off by asking you a few questions actually about what got you into architecture and what inspired you to take that career path.
I think initially as a child, it was not playing with like figurines, but more to do with playing with Legos and like building the blocks and trying to see how beautiful I can make that in different forms. And eventually, I think with every space that I visited, or I think in my last year at school, my house was getting renovated. And I did look at that as an opportunity to see how beautiful I want to make my space or my room particularly. And I was like, okay, this is an opportunity to churn my creativity. And that's what brought me to architecture. But funnily enough, when I start with the idea of creativity and exploring to do out-of-the-box things, I think it eventually, with the study of architecture, it sort of brought me to understanding that creativity is symbiotic to pragmatic and radical thinking. And both of that together brought me to where I am right now with sustainability in architecture.
And you graduated from the AA?
Yes.
And now you're at PLP?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your role there.
Yes. So I think the AA shaped my thinking towards sustainability and how that pragmatic element from architecture needs to be thought of in a lens of the future and the built environment and the climate crisis and everything that's there around. And with PLP, the work that I do, I feel has been very encouraging. And the work over there entails, let's say, two parts. One is the practice itself and one is the project that the practice does. So with regard to projects, it's more to do with how you design spaces in the most high-performing conditions and how do you reduce the impact on the planet with the use of climate methodologies, carbon emissions, etc. And with the practice, it's about educating people about what this actually means and expressing the idea and being able to make sure everyone in the office is being able to speak the language that I learned at the AA or I wish to look at in the future for sustainability in architecture. So that's sort of my role, and it involves a lot of software exploration and putting together a series of words that in our climate language or sustainable language gets a little too much and trying to express that in the right way. So it's a combination of pushing the projects and everyone's mindset as well.
Yeah. And I've talked on various different podcasts around the sort of the changing role of the architect. Mm-hmm. What do you see the sort of modern role of an architect?
Honestly, I feel it's not been too long since I have been in the industry or started off as an architect. And for me, the crux of understanding the idea of architecture or sustainability is that modern expression. So I began my career with that modern expression. And I feel like, and from what I've heard from people in the industry or how people have been thinking so far, I think that radical change is really important. And that modern outlook to integrate design in a way that it is sustainable. We all look at, like, let's say as an architect, when you start, it becomes your day-to-day job to be creative, and you think about how you bring in sunlight or how you bring in everything else. But why not also look at how you're creating the impact on the planet?
Yeah.
And that is the mindset or the modern way of architectural thinking that I feel has started my journey, and I think that's going on to every architect coming out in the industry.
So I know you're really actually actively involved with a lot of groups outside of PLP, including you're a steering group member at Architects Declare, with Letty, with ACAN, and with ULI. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing with those groups?
Yeah, for sure. So I feel the work that I've been doing outside of PLP, engaging with these organizations, has brought a wider perspective or a wider exchange of knowledge amongst similar mindset and similar thoughts among people. So ACAN is a place where people interact with each other. Architects Declare is a place where firms or practices, architectural practices, come together to discuss it. And ULI is a more global platform where people exchange knowledge not just about the built environment in terms of buildings or small scale architecture, but to do with cities and global impacts. So for me, the impact or the way that I look at my perspectives changing is about being able to contribute my little bit or my little drop in the ocean into this particular set of knowledge. And my role in ACAN is a part of the thematic group of existing buildings, where we promote the idea of retrofit and implement the idea of don't demolish buildings, don't waste buildings, make what you have the best and make it more efficient and make it more impactful and effective in a sense. And with Architects Declare, there's two parts where, like I said, we engage with firms on a larger scale. And we also look at the side where you need to get to the government and the authorities to say there is much more to architecture than what has been followed as a norm. And these kind of ideas are not what brought me to architecture initially when I started off. And with this sort of a atmosphere that I'm in and trying to advocate that change that I have developed over the years has really broadened my perspective, and that role helped me with going further. And getting to ULI, I am on the experts panel group for the carbon pricing, which I think is very important considering that not everyone is in a bubble of climate change and climate action. And in order to address the people outside that bubble, there is a requirement of looking at finances as a very important factor. And being able to put that in conjunction to architecture and sustainability actually helps. And that is the sort of role that helps me shape more than what a project can do within just as PLP or any architecture firm.
I think you're absolutely right. I think getting the economics of sustainability right is suddenly bringing it out to a much wider audience. I think there used to be maybe a misperception that sustainability costs, and I think we're seeing a big change in that thinking now.
Yes, for sure.
The economics of sustainability now, and you mentioned that, and there was a sort of an old assumption that sustainability would always cost. Who are you seeing that's driving now sustainability within the built environment? Is it at a client level, contractor level, or is it still from an architectural perspective?
Right. So I think the architect is not the end decision maker, and the decision maker is always the developer, the client, or the person who's driving that building to come up and rise itself. So as an architect, you do have the ability to speak your opinions. And especially for me, coming as an in-house sustainability specialist in an architecture practice, I think you're very far away from the chain of the person who is making the decision. But as my role, I feel one person can affect the other person and then create the domino effect till the client. And with the most recent project that I worked with, which was the Korean meteorological building, I think that mindset started from the client. And when it comes from the client, the architects finds it more motivating that something that I've been talking about has now been reciprocal image from somebody who wants to build it on site. So that is what makes the change, I feel. And that communication or the transfer of knowledge from an architect's vision to a client's vision is very important, and the client can bring the change and they need that education.
So tell us a little bit more about that project. What made it unique, especially around some of the maybe the sustainability initiatives that you put in place?
Yeah, okay. The Korean meteorological building was meant to be a net zero building, and this is to look into the vision of Korea for 2030 or 2050 as they have it. And it starts with the idea of the government wanting this as their own project. And because of the idea of net zero, it became very important to know what defines net zero. Not everyone understands what it means. So net zero can be net zero water, net zero carbon, net zero operation, net zero embodied energy. It can be anything. So for us, it was necessary to understand that we will do net zero on a whole life of a building, even though the client's aspiration was to be a net zero operational building. So what we did is start off with the idea of creating a space that reduces the emissions to the largest level and in terms of operation. So we started with how architecture can delve into shaping this building. So we looked at what are the main spaces that make this building, and we saw how much energy emissions do these have. And then we placed them in orientations and moved them around in a way that it falls in line with the climate factors. And that climatic factor that influenced architecture then helped us build that narrative of spaces that need to be more comfortable just in a passive way. So everything went on a passive strategy. And we looked at this as a holistic way of the meteorological building working with the earth in itself, with all the factors of air, water, and these are things that the meteorological building does. So we took that as inspiration and used that as all the passive strategies, with getting good natural ventilation, good daylighting, and orienting spaces that have more comfortable thermal atmospheres. And we also understood that with this project, there was not only the element of materials and energy, but another element of biodiversity and understanding how nature becomes important, because these people who work in that space really are in a very stressful atmosphere. And that stressful atmosphere can be mitigated with the evolving nature that we have around us. And we created that third space, that we call it, into integrated part of this building, which then makes the holistic life of the building more sustainable in a way, and leads us to that net zero energy, net zero carbon. And then once we had the whole building ready in terms of its design language, we integrated the idea of low embodied carbon materials and how we can get innovative solutions to that. And then that becomes a holistic way of looking at whole life carbon, materials, biodiversity, nature, and co-evolving that whole regenerative concept of design. So that helped.
You mentioned innovation there as well, and especially biomaterials.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the innovations that maybe you used on that project, or some of them that excite you and projects you're using at the moment?
There is one very interesting innovative material or innovative concept that I came across, which was the use of algae as a biomaterial into solving the idea of the greenhouse gas emissions that we have on a regular basis. So we try to improve the atmospheric conditions by using low carbon materials. But what if there are things outside of the built environment that always let out some sort of pollution into the atmosphere? Can something do that kind of a job of carbon capture throughout the life of a building, not just in the beginning when you stop the construction? So algae as a bioreactor, or algae integrated into the building systems, can actually sequester that carbon throughout the building's life cycle. So, and I saw this coming from a studio called Ecological Studio in London, and they've been doing some great work. And I did go on a hands-on workshop with them to understand how this is done on a laboratory basis. And I feel, and another side of innovation that I feel is important is, we know the cold fact about how 40% of the built environment is the contributor to carbon emissions across the globe. But the rest of the 60% can be that integrated mode for you to make your 40% go lower. I can give you an example where I've seen some of these innovative projects where people are using the industrial emission coming out of tire manufacturing and taking that and making tiles out of it into your building. There are innovations where people are using rice husk that is being burnt after agricultural produce, and that creates pollution. So people are mitigating that burning into using it into furniture or into products in the building environment. So we can use little inspirations from these sort of innovations and bring it into our built environment and like correlate every industry into our work.
We're seeing it a lot in the low carbon concrete solutions as well, where they're obviously capturing a waste material in that respect. No, it's absolutely fascinating. Where do you find new innovations as an architect? I suppose that's quite a challenge, isn't it? Is to sort of, do they come to you?
I think you do think about it, but do you know how to work towards it? Do you know where you can start off from? Maybe not the very initial idea that pops out of your brain one morning, but there is always something that academics or institutions can bring across for research, for innovation. And with all the technological development with AI and everything that we have going on in our own PLP research development areas, we feel like it is a possibility. And where do you go? We need to figure that out eventually in the process of the innovatings.
Exactly. Policy and regulation has always been a big thing when it comes to innovation, and sometimes it's seen as slowing it down, but in other times it can see as actually developing innovation a lot faster. What's your views on that?
I feel policy is for bringing the idea in a way that it is tangible, in a way that people will use it for sure. Because sometimes I feel as an architect, everything needs to come from within your head, within what you want to do better for the planet, what you want to do in a way that you impact change or impact a world for a better place. But not everything or not everyone thinks about it that way. So policy makes innovation or the thoughts that people have on a minuscule level into maximizing it and sort of giving that roadmap or giving that tangible route for people to take instead of something just remaining in your brain and it's never been like kindled with. So, yeah. You do a lot of work around the circular economy and circular materials in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about your work? Yes. I think the idea of sustainability, in fact, starts with let's make a lower impact and let's reduce the waste. And we say it's 100% sustainable in terms of a building. But does 100% sustainable mean really good? I think 100% sustainable means 100% not too bad. But 100% circular or 100% regenerative means you've really put your heart into making the whole system. And I think starting from academics, you look at designing in a way that you're doing something innovative. Once you get into practice, you're designing up to the stage that your building is constructed, but looking at it in a different mindset where you don't just stop at where your building gets constructed, but you look at the life of a building. And as some of the very famous quotes say, architecture is timeless, and it's necessary for it to remain timeless and value every part and every element of that architectural space. And I feel that comes from the idea of circularity. So circularity makes something never go away. It always remains in the cycle in some or the other way. So with circularity that we are looking at in terms of projects, there are multiple facets of it. You can look at disassembly in a way that in future, you take elements out of a building and you put it back into the building or put it back into something else. You can take out the brick from one building and use it in the landscape of another space. You can probably take the stone out of one building and put it into the stone into another building. Basically trying to say that buildings are material banks, buildings are resources, and buildings are investments for the future. There is a need for understanding that there is a resource deficiency, and circularity can make that resource deficiency come within the planetary boundaries and help us with a better life in the planet and better built environment, and for all of us to see the future the way we envision to see the future.
And earlier when we mentioned the economics of things as well, I think there's been a big shift now that waste suddenly has a value and people are seeing that value in waste. Or actually, to quote Duncan Baker-Brown, maybe there's no such thing as waste, it's just a resource in the wrong place. But are you seeing in practical terms now that you're seeing the economic shift?
Honestly, I think waste is not waste. Waste is a resource. And I have seen this when I have worked on projects back in my academic days, and also eventually when I started working in architectural practices back in India. And I think it was somehow always ingrained within me as a child as well to sort of use the waste into making something best out of it. So there was a competition that said, make the best out of waste. And I used, let's say, coconut chips into making a pen stand. So these are things that I didn't realize was called circular economy, but this was just for me to understand what I can do out of things that are thrown away, and how to creatively make that as a picture. So in architectural practice as well, there was a workshop that I attended once where they used bottles that were thrown away, glass bottles that were thrown away, and it was put into making an entire wall along with the mud that was taken from the site itself. So the mud from the site and the bottles itself made a whole wall. So you're not creating anything extra or creating that extra emission, but it's sort of ingrained within me that you can use something else into something else, like something that is not meant to be there. You can throw a bottle, yes, for sure, but you can also use it to make something positive for the industry that you're working in.
What do you think some of the barriers to the wider adoption of ideas like that is? Because it seems to be that in the industry we sort of know the solutions, but the uptake has been particularly slow.
Yeah, I think it's about the knowledge gap. It's about bringing the words or the ideas into a more understandable manner to the public that we're speaking to, and also understanding that there needs to be a way to quantify the quality that you bring. So not everything can be just spoken of. It needs to be proven. And I think one of the biggest barriers is the tangibility and the ability to prove that something can make a change. And once that proof comes into place, that's when people start believing in it. Like, for example, like you said, sustainable materials are expensive at the moment. But are these the ones that are stopping us from not doing it sustainably? Probably yes. But how can you resolve it? By saying that by putting something more than one metric, not putting only cost as a metric, but let's say you put carbon as a metric and then you give a cost to the carbon, then your value for something that is more natural, more sustainable becomes more important and less financial, and then you end up using it. So I feel that barrier can always be mitigated, but you need to speak the language that the person understands, and that helps with solving the barrier. And
we had Simon Sturgis on the podcast on the last episode, and he talked a lot about if you started talking about carbon in terms of carbon budget, that you had to spend, that it would make a lot more sense. And I know one of the thematic themes at ACAN is around carbon literacy as well. And I think that is a real challenge. I think, for people that understand it, it's easy, but it's not at a general public level. And I suppose there's those challenges around communicating sustainability. Do you find that that there isn't that knowledge when you're talking to a client level, but maybe there is in the supply chain?
Yes, for sure. I think there is a knowledge gap with even the people who I talk within the same practice. Like, not everyone understands everything. It's very necessary to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and where they've started their journey from and what they understand and how they have been looking at this whole process. And that's where you feel like you've done your job of communicating the right message. And I think with one of the things that I've been exploring with one of the computational teams within PLP is also to look at how you can put data metrics into a visual expression. And that helps people understand, because a whole page full of numbers or a page full of sentences is not going to communicate as much as what a visual impactful message or a image can give out. So yeah, I think it's really important to bring in sort of a innovation in those ideas as well.
I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the other technologies that you've been exploring, particularly AI as well, and the role maybe that has to play in architecture and, more importantly, sustainable architecture. What's your sort of vision of the future for AI? Is it something to be scared of, or or to be embraced?
I think AI can be embraced if you use it in the right manner. If you use AI for the reasons that they are supposed to be, then it can bring out messages in a more impactful way. Like I just mentioned about how expressing your ideas or expressing technical jargon, especially in the sustainability quantitative analysis that I do on a daily basis with all the projects, and saying this is a better performing space because of this metric being approved in this threshold and this number and things like that, it becomes very important for me to introduce AI or introduce software and different technologies that are growing in order to develop that workflow, in order to make that workflow really fast, so that the turnaround time that we have in architecture or even the climate change is so fast that you need to do something really quick. And AI can help you bring that change and communicate the message. So I personally would love to embrace AI and use it in the work that I do and the work that people should be working with in expressing the language. Because if you have great ideas and you don't express it in the right way, then you're losing the whole connect and there's no point in what you're speaking anymore.
Yeah, so. I agree with you. I think it's the ultimate assistant.
Yes.
And I think with things like blockchain now and the need to maybe process huge amounts of data, it's quite exciting. I think that the outcomes it can have, especially on the built environment. Should we start talking about, material banks and starting to track, material movements? Yeah. I think it's quite an exciting space.
Yes. Yeah. BIM models are being developed with tracking every material that comes out of a building, and the word demolition is moving away, and the word deconstruction is taking such a great importance in this whole idea of circularity or sustainability and bringing the resource efficiency, that BIM models and AI becomes extremely important for sure.
For your work at Architects Declare, one of the key bits of work there is regenerative architecture. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so regenerative architecture is where you look at something beyond even circular economy. It is where you look at working not towards stopping the negative, but towards embracing positive beyond your own scope, and embracing and co-living with nature, and nature that gives us resources on an everyday basis. Nature and the Mother Earth is what we call as a heirloom passed from generation to generation, and I think it's necessary for us to gift something back to the earth in a way that we're working with it and not in silos. And the built environment and the natural environment are not two separate entities. They are more symbiotic, and in a way that we need to understand how this can work together. And regenerative basically implies the idea of positivity with circularity, with sustainability, with the nature integrated into it.
Because I think, it's well publicised about the climate emergency, but what maybe doesn't get talked about enough is our biodiversity emergency that we have, globally, actually.
Yeah. I think when we speak about architecture, we always say we have a certain number of stakeholders. We have, let's say, the client, the developer, the MEP consultant, the structural consultant. All of these are our stakeholders. But why not the planet as one of our stakeholders? Why not look at nature as a stakeholder? Because we're using the space that nature is giving us in order to build our aspiring building. So I think nature, in the sense that even animals, plants, and all of these can be a part of our stakeholder boundary, and then design for all of them together. That's when you're regenerative. That's when you're building and constructing the building within the boundaries of the planetary framework. And I feel biodiversity can bring a better well-being, not only for the users who sit within those buildings, but for a healthy planet in which we all express and live our lives in. So biodiversity is very important, just like how in the meteorological building that I spoke about, that space is the reason why we want to remove stress from people who are working 24 hours in that conducive environment. So I think biodiversity and nature and integration of biomimicry and all of these aspects is very important with the work that we do as architects.
Absolutely, and we've seen the impact of biophilic design as well.
Yes. And I think at PLP Labs, we even did a human experiment with all of our employees, where we had a room full of plants and people worked in there for one whole week, and we measured how the productivity increases and how the impact of your natural surroundings impacts your work production and everything that you do on that 8-hour space that you use it for. And this quantitative aspect that has been put to that qualitative atmosphere actually gives you that tangible way of looking at, this is important, this will give you X% of improvement. So I think these kind of experiments help us in our own space to develop our imaginary fire for thought.
Tell me a little bit more about PLP Labs, because it's an interesting concept.
Yes. PLP Labs is our research and innovation hub within the practice. We, like I said, want to look at a circular system. We want to look at smart systems. We want to look at all the technologies that we can bring to the world in the architectural space that we work in. And PLP Labs works with these kind of ideologies. And the most recent work that we've been doing is with the development of blocks made out of mycelium. Wow. Mycelium comes from the parts of the plant, and it being used in a sustainable way can actually bring you a natural material product. The product that is light in weight, and it has the same ability, or in fact a better ability than conventional adobe brick per se. And this kind of work is helping us push our boundaries towards where we can go for an explorative architecture and a sustainable method of looking at architecture, and how we can use it into our own practices. Like, not just at the smallest scale, but scaling it up to the level of a city. So we are trying to use this idea developed in PLP Labs, let's say, into a fit out of a building, and looking at it in a whole circular manner, looking at building level and trying to say, if you build a timber tower, or can you flexibly move timber in a way that it is a plant-based material, and can you actually use it in the multitude of the abilities that it has. And again, at city levels, we're also looking at how we can bring circularity in, and how smart systems can be integrated. And with, in fact, a circular manner of looking at this was in one of our projects at Bankside Yards. We looked at circularity as an operational way of looking at things. Circularity usually is referred to in the material sense, in the embodied carbon sense, but I think we took it a next level with operational circularity, where if there is a master plan with a building that is meant for dwellings, houses, and buildings that are meant for offices. Offices operate in the morning and dwellings operate in the night. So why not use the energy that the offices leave out in the morning into nurturing the buildings in the night? Why not create that loop within your own space? And this is the kind of language that we bring in, and this is the kind of innovation or the level of complexity and thought that the research labs put into bringing all of these ideas together. And I think it's a very niche subject to bring architectural research into an architecture practice in-house and then implement it within the projects that we have in the office.
Let's talk about maybe leadership within the industry, and in particular, we mentioned your work at people like Letty and ACAN and Architects Clare, and what always inspires me when dealing with those groups is the amount of fantastic young leaders that are in those networks. And I suppose it's some advice from yourself if you're starting out and you maybe you're still at university going through your architectural degree. What sort of some advice you would have even in your very short career?
I think I would say there are tons of people graduating every year, and with the year that I graduated, which was in 2020, it was an era where we heard of the word COVID for the first ever time. And I think young leaders have that voice to put out for a change in the way that we think. For example, when I got into my first office, it was in 2019, and the way everything or the way people spoke about architectural design was what I thought was the way that you need to look at it. But then 6 months later, when COVID came into place, the conversations were different. The way you place a certain spatial arrangement was different. And this sort of a mindset change happened because of that necessity. And like they say, necessity is the mother of innovation. And this innovation brought you to think differently. And as young leaders or youngsters coming into the industry, what I would say is always don't fear the idea of being able to think differently from what has been taught to you and what has been set out as the so-called norm. Instead, always be ready to explore and ready to voice out what you have as your opinion. And as somebody who in childhood was a very timid person, I feel like listening to a lot of people and listening to inspirational figures actually helped me develop my own thought and my own way of pushing some opinions. And I was never scared of asking questions, even though I was timid. I thought asking questions made me listen to a lot of answers and a lot of different perspectives. And as young leaders, there is a very competitive world that if you don't ask the question and you say no to something that you don't know, you're not going to be able to get and grab that opportunity. So I would say never say no, and always say you will figure it out. You will understand and try to figure it in a way that you are doing it differently from what was done before. And just keep your head down and strive with confidence, I guess.
And can you tell us a little bit about maybe the importance of these networks as well, and especially, on connecting and collaboration, I suppose?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, everyone is so competitive and they want to bring out their own idea that they try to keep it within themselves. So collaboration in a way that these organizations that I'm working with help with pushing those ideas to the entire world. And all of us have the same goal. All of us want to make the built environment a better place. I honestly feel that collaboration is the reason why you will achieve greater heights, and exchange of that knowledge, exchange of perspectives, and exchange of the feelings of what you think must be put across is very, very important. And honestly, not just the architecture fraternity, but if you just speak about something that you know of or you are intelligent about to somebody else, they probably have never heard of it, but they have questions that you might have never even thought about. So collaboration in a way that you put across everything that you've been thinking will actually help creating that better atmosphere for the planet, I feel.
That's brilliant. One of our themes for Futurebuild is around impact, and we talk about a lot of people, those people that are driving a positive impact in the built environment. Who are some of the people that you've come across in your professional career that have really inspired you?
My honest answer for that is the one woman I have always admired ever since I got to London and I looked at with aspirations to be somebody like her is Meena Hasman. And she is a true inspiration. She has worked towards helping young professionals like me and many others and sharing that knowledge of what it means to be in this industry, what it means to feel like you want to create an impact. She has also been such an inspiration that she speaks about sustainability and the climate framework in such a passionate manner that it's no more a trend or it's not a buzzword. It's the way of life, and that really inspired me. And I also have had a chance to personally work with her as well, and I really feel that that is how I would like to shape my career and my goals towards the future.
Well, I'm very pleased to say we're going to have her on the podcast soon, so it'll be a fascinating conversation. And actually, just about going back to sort of what motivates you, with your work, especially sort of taking this leadership stance on sustainability.
I think what motivates me is the people who I work with, the people who encourage me and give me the voice to be heard and to be speaking to the people who have such a wide variety of perspectives. And I think as a young professional, because you don't have as much knowledge as other people in the industry, at least at PLP, everyone who I speak to on a daily basis has something to offer that I learn from. And this vision or this will to learn on a daily basis, wake up to understand that today is going to be a new day with meeting new people, with new perspectives, and how you integrate all of that into one agenda that you have. And that's what motivates me.
We talk a lot about the sort of, the impact that the built environment can have on the planet and on the world. What do you see? What should we be doing? What's the biggest impact we can make?
As humans, we have the tendency to always have a footprint. There is no way that we can have a zero carbon footprint as humanity, as the way we live. But there is something that we can do as leaving a big footprint of positivity. And us being in the built environment is probably a question to ask if we've done the right decision. Are we creating that wrong impact or negative impact? But it's about changing your own lens or changing your perspective to looking at that impact that you're creating as not a negative one, but as something way more positive. And how do we do that in the built environment is just by going in the direction of systems and mindset change and not do the linear approach that we've had all of these years towards that has led us to climate change. So I think in the built environment, the impact we can bring is through systems change, if I can rephrase it.
That's brilliant. We've talked a lot about creativity. And there's sometimes that people say, well, sustainability is a sort of holds back design or holds back creativity.
It's funny that you say that because, like I said, I started my journey in architecture as wanting to do something creative. But eventually I realized that creativity and sustainability are not mutually exclusive. They are very, very symbiotic in nature. They work together. And in fact, creativity is what brings the crux to sustainability and architecture. And I think if people are looking at all sorts of restrictions that churns the direction for an architectural space, then sustainability is inbuilt or imbibed within that framework of how you should be designing your space. It's definitely not a hindrance. It's more of a tool to create the impact that we want to do. And you can just take the example of using leftover frames from a door, and you can make a whole facade out of it. And that is creativity. We always forget the idea of making somebody feel a certain way in a space, and we've concentrated our efforts on how a person looks at a space. So the idea of looks takes over the balance of feeling. And if we marry these two things together, that creates the symbiotism between creativity and sustainability. And I think that embracing that is very important. As long as you think it's mutually exclusive or mutually impossible to be done together, it's impossible to push your own boundaries to doing something with restrictions. And restrictions what make you, I think, a better person to break those barriers and go beyond your creative thought and bring the better life out of it. What's the point of creating something so unnatural where you cannot have it going on for a timeless period? If you're going on that journey where you're looking at just creativity without the planetary sustainable ideas, then all you're doing is one day's fame. But if you want the building that you're constructing to be a timeless effort, then it's very necessary to churn both these aspects together.
But what do you feel is going to be some of our future design trends? I know I spoke to Simon about it, and actually you did your AA piece on the sort of complete move away from, we're not going to see glass office buildings, for example. We talk a lot about adaptive design as well. What do you see some of the sort of big design changes that we'll see?
I think the big design change is embracing what is invisible. The idea of glass buildings comes from creating that heat inside a building. But in a hot climate, do you really need a heated building? You don't. You need it to be the opposite of that. There are creative ways, like I just spoke about, and bringing those aspects in a way that you can build the ideas that you have and aspire for a beautiful environment, not just by having the most conventional ideas, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to finish off with just a final question for you, and again, it's on the theme of impact, and it's really, what's a book maybe that's had a real positive impact on your life?
A really good book that I would recommend, or the book that inspired me, is The Donut Economics by Kate Raworth. And she speaks about the framework of planetary boundaries and how economics and the built environment works together. And it's a whole new level of looking at things in a different perspective. And for me, being able to do things differently, being able to push every decision that I take in the right direction has been a starting point through that book. So I think that's a great book to be starting with.
And it was the first book of the recent ACAN book club as well.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it's a great choice.
Definitely.
Lovely.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you
that was
so
absolutely
much.
Fascinating.
Thank you so much for letting me and giving me this opportunity to be here.